Yesterday, 40 Israeli jets took part in a bombing operation in Gaza that claimed the lives of 3 senior officials from the Palestinian group Islamic Jihad, but also 9 civilians, including 3 children. This comes on top of the most deadly year in decades in the West Bank, where day in, day out, week in, week out, Israel has launched military raids into Palestinian territory, towns, refugee camps, and so on. And nothing is done. The European Union does nothing. The Irish government calls for nothing to be done. We moved immediately, and we say repeatedly we need sanctions against Russia for what they've done in Ukraine. We call indeed for the arming of the Ukrainians to resist an illegal occupation of their territory. But we say nothing about the right of the Palestinians to resist day in, day out, week out, illegal occupation of their territory, illegal military raids, illegal bombing raids, a siege of Gaza, and the list of their crimes goes on. When is there going to be some consistency in the foreign policy of this government or the European Union?
Once again, I want to thank deputies for their questions. Deputy Haughey raised the issue of Russian vessels that are operating off our coast. These vessels are in international waters rather than our territorial waters, so they are permitted to be there, but they are operating in our exclusive economic zone, which is of particular importance to us. They are being monitored both by the Navy and by Air Corps. And obviously we cooperate with our EU allies and have access to satellite information as well. As deputies will have pointed out, there are a lot of subsea telecommunication cables that run on the seabed in our exclusive economic zone. I know there is a concern that they could be interfered with if there's an escalation of hostilities between Europe and Russia. And that's particularly in the context of the damage to the Nord Stream pipelines. But it is just a concern at this stage. We've no evidence as yet of any hostile act. So it's a situation that has to be monitored carefully, but I think it's important that we don't escalate it ourselves because it's a concern that we have. We're monitoring the situation, but again, have no evidence yet of any hostile acts from the Russian forces or Russian vessels in relation to Ireland. In relation to the trade matters raised by Deputy MacDonald, I'm going to have to seek advice on what the implications of that European decision are for Ireland, and I'll certainly do that. I've read about it in the papers, but haven't seen anything formally in terms of a briefing as yet. When it comes to the Occupied Territories Bill, our view as a government is that trade is an exclusive EU competence, and any trade sanctions imposed on any country should be done at European level and not unilaterally by Ireland as a member state. Indeed, it may even be a violation of the treaties, and there was advice from a previous AG on that. The issue of the mandate of ISIF, the Irish Strategic Investment Fund, was also raised by deputies, and I know legislation has been passed to prevent ISIF from investing in fossil fuels, for example. I'm not sure if any legislation exists in terms of its remit with respect to other countries, but I'll have to check up with Minister McGrath on that. But I think that if we do make it part of its mandate, I don't think it would be right just to target any one country. You'd have to look at it in the round and make sure that if its mandate prevents it from investing in some countries or some parts of some countries, that we don't single out any particular country, that we look at things in the round and maybe have a list. But I don't know enough about the detail of his investments to comment any further, but I'll certainly let Minister McGrath know that it was raised here. In terms of the European Works Councils, received some briefings on that and had some correspondence with ICTU. My former role as Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, things may have moved on a bit since then. The file is now being handled by Minister Richmond, so I let him know that it was raised here and asked him to come back to deputies by correspondence. And then in relation to Mr Phelan, who's being detained in Iran, very much aware of the case. I know the Department of Foreign Affairs is working on it, doing all that we can to ensure that man is released as soon as possible. know that he's in poor health and very concerned about that. But again, Iran, as deputies will know, is not the friendliest regime to Ireland at the moment, and vice versa. But we are doing anything we can, and we really hope that they'll see this as a humanitarian issue and set aside politics in the interests of a man who is very sick and needs to get home to his family.